Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Marks & Clerk Brand Development and Protection presentation, where we're bridging the gap between lawyers and marketers. Next slide. First, a few housekeeping matters. Attendees, your lines are on listen mode only, and this event is being recorded. In the event of any technical issues, please refresh the event page. If the issues persist, please contact it@marksandclerk.ca for assistance. All attendees are automatically muted, but we do encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation. To ask a question, hover your mouse over the Zoom window. A toolbar will then appear at the bottom of your screen with a prominent Q&A button. Clicking on this button will open the Submit a Question prompt. For optimal viewing of today's presentation, please change your settings to Fit Window. And now for introductions. Next slide. My name is Diane Thompson, and I'm an associate with Marks & Clerk and your moderator today. My practice focuses on the clearance, protection, enforcement, and licensing of copyrights and trademarks, as well as data and privacy law matters. Next slide. Catherine Lovebergs is a lawyer and trademark agent that has been practicing all things brand protection for over 15 years. She's managed large international trademark portfolios, as well as Canadian domestic portfolios. Her copyright and marketing advertising experience is a unique complement to her trademark practice, and her clients love her well-rounded, unique approach, practical advice, and how accessible her advice is to legal and marketing teams. While she speaks legalese, she prefers plain old English. Next slide. Jeremy Miller is the founder of Sticky Branding, a strategy coaching firm, and the best-selling author of 2 books, Sticky Branding and Brand New Name. He's a globally recognized branding expert that helps companies grow sticky brands. Next slide. And of course, when dealing with branding and legal, we have to start off with some disclaimers. Nothing in this presentation should be taken or relied on as legal advice, but you can call us if you do need legal advice. Any views expressed are personal and don't necessarily reflect those of the firm or our clients. So please blame Jeremy and Kat if you have any issues. Any unauthorized use or reproduction of this presentation is prohibited, and the law is jurisdictional, and we are Canadian lawyers and agents. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Diane. Well, welcome everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here today and to have this conversation. What Kat and I have set up for you is a conversation really between marketing and legal and brand protection. And our two worlds are so complementary, but we also have this tension where we need to keep each other honest and thriving as well, because when you get it right, you create iconic brands. Now, today, what Kat and I are going to do is really take a deep dive into the realm of naming as an anchoring point, but we'll expand beyond this just to the idea of what does it take to defend and protect your brand. And so we will hand this back and forth. There's probably going to be some messiness in this. This is COVID. We don't know what we don't know as we work through these virtual presentations like we're doing today. So my ask to you is just simply participate. If you got a question, use the Q&A function. If you want to chat in the box, by all means do that. Introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and where you're from. But let's dive into this discussion, because I really want to start off on this idea of naming. And to me, this is the cornerstone of what a brand is. You know a brand by its name. Actually, you know everything by its name. Naming is one of the most basic constructs of the English language. You know something by what it's called. And one of the simplest and easiest ways to think of this is it's like a label in a file folder in your mind. Now, that label could say the brand name, like Coca-Cola or Target or Walmart or whoever it might be. But what the folder contains is every experience you have with that brand, whether it's good, bad, personal, your knowledge of it, features, benefits. And the longer you interact with the brand, the more that folder grows, the more that contents grow. But to create that file folder in your mind, it needs name. Let me give you an example of this. This is actually a very abstract example, but I love it. It really connects the dots. At the turn of the 19th century, astrophysicists, the smartest people in the world, people like Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer, Volkov, basically everybody that was in the Manhattan Project was studying this strange phenomenon in space known as totally collapsed gravitational objects, totally collapsed gravitational objects. Now, here's what it was, is basically when a star dies, the gravitational forces collapse onto itself. And sometimes the forces can be so strong that not even a particle of light or an electron can escape from it. So these individuals, these scientists and astrophysicists were studying this because, well, they were making a nuclear bomb and they wanted to understand just the physics of this. And they would go around the country and they would give lectures talking about totally collapsed gravitational objects. But here's the thing. You had to know the math. You had to know the science to participate in those conversations. It was very cerebral, high-end stuff. That is until Dr. David Wheeler came up with a better name, black hole. And in 2 words, it took a concept relegated to the smartest individuals in the world and made it accessible to everybody. And you think of the power of this name, it's beautiful. In 2 words, you can visually experience this. You know what black is, you know what hole is, you put the 2 words together, and it's an area in space that sucks everything into it, and not even a particle of light or an electron can escape from it. And that's the power of a name. When you give something a name, you give it meaning, you give it gravitas. There's actually a project going on in Illinois around the Chicago area where a group of individuals are going around and naming empty spaces. So, you know, like the space between the grass area between, say, a parking lot and a building, or the triangle, those off-ramp sections of land. Well, what they found is when they give something a name, people start to care for it. They cut the lawn, they put in a park bench. The simple act of giving something a name gives it meaning. And that's what we're doing in branding, is we're creating meaning. Branding is all about meaning making. And so a name in its fundamental source, when you get all excited by this, is it's like poetry. In a word or two, you are capturing the essence of your brand, whether that's your company, a product, an idea, a process. And it's a simple phrase that contains so much meaning. And that's why we want to defend and protect these things, because they're meaning makers. Now, to help facilitate this conversation, where I want to start us off with is really to look at the anatomy of a name. Let's explore just functionally how brand names are constructed. And there's really 3 types of names: descriptive names, suggestive names, and abstract names. And you can see in the graphic, if you're watching online, you've got lots of different words you can make names, like acronyms and constructed words and misspelled words, etc. Actually, if you go look at your children's brands and go down the cereal aisle, you'll notice that every children's brand seems to be misspelled. Like, brands have been trying to not teach us the English language for generations. Like crispy cornflakes, actually cornflakes is probably the only one spelled properly, but Fruit Loops and everything else, all phonetically spelled. So let's just look at these examples, because what I want to illustrate is there is no such thing as a bad name. If you are creative, if you're innovative, you can create an iconic name. A descriptive name simply describes what the brand is. It tells you what you're going to get. A suggestive name indicates what the brand is like. It gives you an indication of what the experience will be. And an abstract name is an empty vessel. But let's look at the 2 extremes. So a descriptive name. One of my favorite brands is Big Ass Fans. I love it. In 3 words, you know exactly what this company does. They make big ass fans. And it's whimsical, it's fun. Like often descriptive names are thought of as, we are a Toronto accounting firm or Manhattan actuaries. Like, you think of these things in just very blasé ways, but Big Ass Fans is evocative. But the company actually started out as HVLS Fan Company, which stood for High Volume, Low Speed Fan Company. But their customers kept calling up and saying, hey, are you those guys that sell those really big fans, those big ass fans? And after a while, their customers or the management team took notice of this, and they leaned into it, and they rebranded the company, and it created whimsy and interest, and it's grown into a truly iconic B2B brand. Another example is on the abstract side of things. Again, you don't have to create or choose words and brands that are purely meaningless. A story makes your brand more interesting. A great example of this is Bluetooth. Now, Bluetooth is that ubiquitous technology that we all know. It's what connects our devices together. And what it was created for was a SIG, a special interest group between the biggest technology companies in the world, companies like Ericsson, IBM, Nokia, and Intel. And they wanted to come together to create a protocol so that they could connect disparate pieces of electronics to communicate with each other. And when they created the SIG, they chose the metaphor of Bluetooth. And the story is Bluetooth is named after a medieval Norwegian king, Harold Blatten, who conquered most of Northern Europe, but he did it without violence. He was able to negotiate and bring multiple tribes and religions and groups together, all under his banner. And it functioned as a beautiful metaphor for this SIG trying to create a communication platform to get technology to talk with one another. Now, the word Blatten in ancient Norse stands for blue tooth. Turns out that Harold Blatten had a dead or rotten tooth, and he was known as basically King Bluetooth. So they took that metaphor. Now, they had no expectation that this would be the brand name that was going to stick, but it was going to stick. And what they expected was marketing would come up with a better idea, which seems to be always the way. Like, let's let marketing figure it out. So marketing was tasked to come up with the new name to replace Bluetooth. And they came up with PAN for Personal Area Network. Now, if we put our IT hats on and think back 10 or 20 years ago, we used to have LANs and WANs, so local area networks, wide area networks. So a personal area network makes sense. Well, the lawyers got their hands on it, did a knockout search, saw it, went, nope, nixed it right out of the gate. And running out of time, they just stuck with the pilot name that they had for the special interest group, and we have Bluetooth. And you can actually see Harold Blatten in the logo. They took the Norse runes of H and B to create the symbol for Bluetooth. So you could be wildly creative in your branding and naming. And in doing so, you begin to create iconic names. Kat, let me hand this off to you. You pick that up and carry this.
Thank you. All right. So, Jeremy, I think you were right on point. The brands really are about being an identifier. And I think from a legal perspective, what's key is one thing is that it functions as a sign or an identifier for one company. So you began by sort of describing when you name something like a black hole, you give it meaning. And legally, when I'm approaching things from a brand protection perspective, the first question I have is whether or not consumers are likely to perceive that as being associated with one company, or whether or not it's so descriptive that anyone should be able to use it. And if it is descriptive, then generally speaking, it's a harder play in order to get brand rights to it. And so from a legal perspective, really, is it a sign? And trademarks can be words, they can be designs, they can be non-traditional marks now, and each of these things need to function as an identifier of a single source. So in terms of, from a trademark perspective, in terms of what you can protect anything from brand names and slogans to arbitrary words. You've already run through the coined or fanciful or the suggestive words. And then you transition to design. So you use the big ass fans example, and that design had a picture of a donkey or an ass. And the combination of those words, while big ass fans may itself be descriptive, after use and after acquiring distinctiveness and in combination with the logo, they begin to function as a trademark as opposed to just an expression, big ass fans associated with big ass fans. And when you're talking about designs, you can have a word and design component, you can have logos, you can have mascots, you can have emblems or monograms. And more recently, other things function as signs, other things can function as a trademark or something that signals an individual source. So everything from an animation, if you think about, you turn on, name your television program and you have a bumper that starts before the program that identifies the production company or the distribution company, that animation functions as a trademark. The position of something can function as a trademark. So if you have a very unique positioning in terms of where you place a logo or something on clothing or on a bag or what have you, that actual position itself can function as a trademark. The look of a product or its getup or its trade dress can function as a trademark. And now we also can protect things like sounds. We can all probably hear the MGM Lions roar, or in fact, in the entertainment industry, there's a whole series of things that can be protected as sound marks, including Homer's dough. And holograms, scents, tastes, and textures can also function as trademarks. And what's key, as I said, is that really the meaning of the mark is that it tells, it's an origin story, and I'm being glib there, but that it tells where the goods and services originate from. It identifies a single source. It is not a dictionary word or a descriptive term for any product or a feature of the product, but it identifies that the goods and services with which that you're trying to use this name for come from a single source. And that's quintessential from a trademark perspective. And generally speaking, it needs to identify not only a single source, but in the mind of the consumer, be associated with some form of quality. Traditionally, trademarks or brands really were used in the marketplace for consumers to know that if they bought a product associated with a particular brand, they were getting a particular quality, and that was the function of trademarks. And that remains part legally of what we worry about, of the trademark piece. And I think it's important to say that from a sort of level set perspective, when you're at the drawing board, not all trademarks are created equal, legally speaking. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but really from sort of descriptive terms that may acquire distinctiveness to coin terms, when you're sitting at the drawing board, it's important to keep in mind that the more inherently distinctive the mark and the less crowded the marketplace, and that's basically what today's talk is about, the less crowded the marketplace, the stronger your rights are likely to be inherently. After that, really, it depends on how much you've invested in marketing and reputation and how much goodwill you've built on a brand that will sort of widen your scope of protection. But from a marketing perspective, us lawyers really, it's important for us to know that marketing understands that when you're at the drawing board, the decisions you make will impact the scope of your rights inherently, and there's cost implications potentially to that as well. Jeremy, I think I'll pass it back to you now.
Yep. So what you're leading to, Kat, then is this question of differentiation and how do you stand out? And I like the metaphor of how do you find the white space, because great branding is unique. It's kind of the same, but more. It takes on what we know, but is different. And you look at every iconic brand that is out there, they are all carving out their own niche and space. And I think this is always the key element to the brand building journey is how are you going to make your business or your brand stand out like an orange tree in an evergreen forest? And one of my favorite stories of this is actually Haagen-Dazs. Haagen-Dazs has this brilliant entrepreneurial origin story. And the founder, Ruben Mattis, started in a family business called Senator Brands. And what he experienced as he grew the business is he faced basically an ice cream cabal where operating out of the Bronx and Brooklyn and New York, as he grew, he started to encroach into the established territory of other major competitors, and they basically locked him out. And he said that if you are the same, you are lost. And he said it in a broken English way, and I won't try to imitate that, but he is so absolutely right. And so to stand out in the market, what he wanted to create was a super premium ice cream. And if you go back 50 years, that kind of a concept, while common today, was completely unique. Now, to create this brand, what he wanted to do was to create a foreign sounding brand name. So he wanted to create something that had the connotations of premium, like Swiss chocolate or old world European values and quality. And his daughter told the story of how he would sit in his kitchen night after night, saying out gibberish words, trying to find a sound that sounded perfectly right. And he created Haagen-Dazs. And Haagen-Dazs is hilarious because it is gibberish. It is an invented word, but it seems like it's perfect. It's old world. And most North American consumers have never questioned it, thought about it. They just accept it. And so this brand has created its own space in the area. And when you compare it to other brands, ice cream is a very competitive category that I've worked in for many years. It's the naming conventions and the ability to stand out is getting harder and harder. So I'd like to introduce you to a very simple tool called a namescape. And this is something that is, and I'll bring it up again further along. It comes from my book, Brand New Name, but it's a simple tool that you can use to map out your territory. And if you notice the top row, it's saying it's the types of names, and then the other column is the types of words they are. And what you could do, this is an example of quick serve restaurants, is you can plot the places that your brand or your competitors are sitting. So take your direct and indirect competitors, plot them out, where do they sit? And what this gives you is an opportunity to actually analyze where are the trends. Is there a trend towards certain types of names? Is there a trend towards certain themes, certain colors, certain ideas? And when you start to map out the competitive landscape, you start to see the white space. For example, I got my start in this actually rebranding my family business back in 2004. And we went through this very exercise for ourselves. And one of the things that we noticed was that a lot of our competitors, which was in the recruiting space, use the words recruiting and staffing in their company names. So we set a guideline in our naming strategy that those words couldn't be created. And so we came up with the brand name Leap Job, and it was evocative and fun. It was all about leaping forward. But because we knew the white space, we knew where it could stand out in the marketplace. So I'm going to put out a simple offer here. If you'd like a blank copy of these templates, shoot me a quick email at jeremy@stickybranding.com. Just put worksheet into the subject line, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of the namescape worksheet. It's brilliant to help you in your market assessment to see where do we need to create our strategy. Kat?
Thanks. All right, so from a legal perspective, and as a quote from Hans F. Hansen, it takes nothing to join the crowd, it takes everything to stand alone. And this is key. Legally speaking, distinctiveness is the name of the game, and being able to identify a mark, which, as Jeremy said, that stands in the white space and adopt it and build on it is key. This is sort of a simple graph and picking up on the not all trademarks are created equal concept that outlines sort of where we plot things. And the long and the short is that the closer the nexus between a particular word and the goods and services, the weaker the mark inherently. And the broader the nexus, or if there's no nexus, the stronger the mark. So generic terms, generally speaking, cannot be registered or protected as trademarks. And there are examples of trademarks that, and we'll talk about this in a bit, that become generic terms out of maintenance issues and out of people starting to associate the mark, not with one individual source, but with a product category or a type of product in particular. Next up, you have descriptive terms, and clearly descriptive terms are not registrable unless they acquire distinctiveness. So unless the term rises to a level where consumers no longer hear it as a clearly descriptive term, but instead it becomes a trademark. So in Canada, the Weather Network, for example, when you hear the Weather Network, you presumably start to think about that specific channel as opposed to any weather network. And there's tons of examples of that through lots of advertising, lots of use, and tons of reach. You can acquire distinctiveness and take what otherwise would be clearly descriptive terms out of the lexicon of words that are available for everyone and get exclusive rights, but those are expensive and inherently weaker. And it takes a considerable investment, not just to build reputation, but also to be able to protect them. From there, you have suggestive marks. And I think, practically speaking, that's where the bulk of marks are. And suggestive marks tend to be where legal and marketing can sort of shake hands. And they're usually a crowded marketplace. So your scope of protection is narrow because you have to fit in and you're tolerating coexistence with a number of other individuals. And next up, you have arbitrary marks, which are dictionary words, real words, but the words have no connection with the associated goods and services. Apple for computers, BlackBerry for phones. Those are real dictionary words, but they're words that don't describe or don't even suggest the associated goods and services. And those are inherently strong marks. And generally, I prefer for clients to land closer to that end of the spectrum, although we do tend to land in the suggestive box. And finally, we have coined marks, which from a legal perspective are the unicorns. Those are the marks we want you all to adopt. But I know from a marketing perspective, they're not always where people want to land. And so I think it's important, as I said, at the drawing board phase, just to keep this in mind when you're thinking of marks. Know that wherever you pick or wherever you land, may have marketing upside that comes with a legal downside, or may have legal upside that comes with a marketing downside. But as long as you're making those decisions deliberately, you'll be well served. I'm trying to move the next slide. It's not letting me. There we go. So distinctiveness is the name of the game, and I think that's key. Whether or not it's inherent distinctiveness, which is what I was just talking about. So inherently, are you picking a word that is likely to describe goods and services or is suggestive, or is it acquired distinctiveness? Have you used this mark so extensively and so broadly that as a result of that use, you've acquired goodwill and distinctiveness in the mark? And that, from a legal perspective, is what gives you a scope of protection and what gives you the ability to enforce against third parties. Next slide, it's not working.
Do you need to click?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Sorry, Jeremy. Awesome. So the punchline legally is try not to describe your goods and services if you can. And if you do, then you have to think about workarounds in order to both ensure that the mark is not deemed clearly descriptive and that we can get around distinctiveness objections. Distinctiveness objections are new in Canada, and we're seeing them pop up in a whole array of areas where people wouldn't necessarily expect them when you're looking to register your mark. And usual tips and tricks are, if you're going to pick something that describes your product or service, be clever, go with a double entendre, go with a play on words, because if you can argue that dual meaning, it certainly helps. And as Jeremy said at the beginning, really, if you're telling a story, if you have a beautiful story that backs what your mark is, even if it's descriptive, that helps us argue in your favor that, while it may be suggestive, it's not clearly descriptive. You can also consider adding additional word components or design components. All of those things can sort of move your mark towards being distinctive and at least being more likely to be protectable and registrable from a Canadian perspective. Over to you, Jeremy.
I'm going to throw one tip on this because you're pushing us towards some of the more invented words and coin phrases. One of the things I would say, so what makes Kodak a great name? Do you know? Kat, what would you say?
Oh, no, I don't. Well, it's a great name just because I grew up with it.
It's a great brand for sure.
Yeah.
It's phonetically, it's the Kodak. It's the way we say it. It has a phonetic rhythmic quality that makes it really memorable. And so if you are inventing words, really the side of it is to focus on creating words that are phonetically driven versus coming from Greek or Latin roots. And so Kodak, Acura, those are great invented words. Whereas I'll use a defunct brand, singular, very hard to spell, very hard to remember. It takes $1 bazillion marketing dollars to make one of those invented words stick. But that's what we do. And this is really a great segue into naming sucks. I am going to put this out here right now and say this. I am in the business. I am a serial entrepreneur. I have named multiple things. If you have named things, you will agree with me. It is the most frustrating activity that there is, because it's not hard to come up with a brilliant name. It's hard to find a brilliant name. The issue that we are all experiencing today is that we, for the first time in human history, are experiencing a naming drought. And this is a very surreal thing to say, but we are literally consuming words faster than we can create them. And the stats are just shocking. You look at the surge in the ongoing growth of domain names, the ongoing persistent growth of small businesses, and just how quickly we are consuming language. There are 470,000 words in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and I'm willing to bet over 80 to 90% of them have been trademarked. Buffer, orange, apple. We've taken all these phrases and we've consumed them. We've trademarked them. We've even gone back into history and taken all the Greeks and Roman gods and stories, and we've trademarked that too. I don't know how well that everyone from that period in time feels about peddling soap and jewelry, but there you go. That's where their names have gone. And so this is why naming is such an interesting topic and frustrating topic at the same time. When you get a name right, when you get a name like Kodak, which was created by Eastman, his first name just slipped out of my mind, but the founder and his mother sat in the kitchen with a Scrabble board and an anagram board and pushed letters together until they got the right word. But the thing is, they weren't competing with so many brands at that moment in time. So finding a great word or a great brand is the challenge. And this to me is the hurdle that is so missed in the marketing realm right now, because everyone shows us what a great brand looks like. No one shows us how to do it. Let me give you a very simple example of this. There's a brilliant meme that went around the internet a few years ago called How to Draw an Owl, a fun and simple guide to create an owl in 2 steps. So we can all try this. You got a pen and paper, give it a whirl. So step 1, draw 2 circles, one for the head and one for the body. I think we can all do that. Step 2, draw the rest of the damn owl. What? This is what branding and marketing does to us. You can see behind me, I got lots of books. I look at my profession and it's all about big ideas. It's all about how to be like Apple and Nike and Starbucks, but nobody is actually showing us how. And naming is that same thing where it's this black box in advertising agencies and it's all this super creativity. And it doesn't. It's a process. It is a step-by-step methodology to find and create a brilliant name. And the name of the game to solve the naming drought is you need volume. You need to create a disproportionate number of ideas in order to get through the trademark hurdles and the knockout searches to find that one space that you can own for yourself. And that's what I really set out to do in my book, Brand New Name. Being a serial entrepreneur, being in this space for a long time, I kept getting asked that question. I kept getting frustrated by that how to draw an owl metaphor. And so what the book provides you is actually what's on the screen here. It is a proven step-by-step process to name anything in 2 to 4 weeks. And I'm not going to unpack all of this today, but I'll just focus on a few key items. So number 1, there's 3 core stages you're going to go through. Number 1, build a plan. Do your analysis, figure out the white space, figure out the strategy, because the way to get through the selection piece is you need to know what you're naming and why. So when you have a strategy, it makes selection easier. Now, out of that, what I do that's really unique is I really believe in unlocking the creative genius of your employees to name things. Inside the walls of your building is immense creative potential. So we structure this as a 5-day naming sprint, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but we get everybody involved in a gamified process to get people submitting ideas. And when you generate hundreds, if not thousands of ideas, chances are you will find something brilliant. And then the third stage of this is you need to have process for testing and selecting. So shortlisting, evaluating, and whittling that down to the high probability brand names that will fit, that when you go to knockout, you're going to be pretty certain that you have something that will work. Or if you don't have something that works, you have backup options. So all of this is in my book, Brand New Name. It's available where books are sold. I'm not trying to pitch this, but it gives you the whole methodology in the second half of it. The piece I really want to highlight, though, is the naming sprint. Inside your business is so much creativity. And the thing that drives me so nuts is that every time we go to marketing, every time we go to think of these creative moments, especially in the brand building journey, the first reaction is to outsource it. And I think that's such an incredible mistake, because in the brand building journey, you have people that, while they might not do creative activities as their day job, they can help create the brand. So why not give them a chance to do this? And I love this Einstein quote, because creativity is contagious. How do we pass it on? How do we leverage it? What the naming sprint does, and what you get in the book, is exercises that you can then challenge your team with. And when we do this at scale, we automate it and we put another process. But just let me show you how it works. When you challenge your team to do 5 good names per day for 5 days, a small business can create a whole lot of names. This is an example of E3, which is an iconic restaurant group out of Seattle, Washington. They run restaurants like the Metropolitan Grill, Elliott's on the Water. So some of the key landmarks in Seattle. Now, they are a 3rd generation family business. And before 2019, they were known as Consolidated Restaurant Inc., CRI. But as they were transitioning to the 3rd generation, they wanted to create something new. And so we ran the naming sprint, and over the course of 5 days with 30 people, they generated 639 names. And the thing that is so interesting about this origin story is E3 is actually the name of a seasoning spice used in all of their restaurants. And the seasoning spice was created by Earl Owens, which was this larger than life character who was the executive chef of the Metropolitan Grill in the 80s. And if the Iron Chef was on TV back then, he would have been an Iron Chef. He was that kind of guy. He really pioneered the restaurant industry in the Pacific Northwest. And so he created Earl seasoning spice, and E3 was the 3rd version, or the 3rd iteration of this. And it was one of the employees that submitted this idea and this story, and it resonated so much with the management team, because it was a story of their heritage and where they've come from, but it also gave them permission to evolve the brand forward. And so inside your company is actually the creative talent that can help create the names and the volume of names that you're going to need to solve that naming drought, and to get those ideas that'll pass those trademark hurdles that you're guaranteed to face. Okay.
Excellent. So, well, that brings us to searching, and that's where the lawyers typically do come in at some point. So first of all, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's different levels of searching. And when you're dealing with 639 names, presumably you're going to filter down to a certain point before you even engage in knockout searches. Knockout searches really are looking to see whether or not you're locked out, whether or not there's a clear block and you should move on. They're not aimed at confirming that a mark is available for use and registration. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, including internally, because often, even when you have your short list, everyone will be, cheering for one particular mark, and you may become wedded too early to a mark, and then identify you have a real problem, and a problem that's not easily navigable. From there, you have a register search, and a register search really looks at the trademarks register. It looks to see whether or not on the register, not only is the identical or a nearly identical mark registered with basically overlapping goods and services, but it looks more broadly. So it looks at whether or not it aims to identify confusingly similar marks. So marks that may be phonetically similar, may be similar in idea, may have a similar prefix or a similar suffix, or are in related spaces, but do not directly overlap. Basically, it aims to identify who may, based on their registered rights or based on the place in line before you on the register, cause a problem for you. And then from there, in common law jurisdictions in particular, we'll run what is called a comprehensive or a common law or a full search. And a comprehensive search, it casts a wider net. It looks not only at the trademarks register, but it looks at business name registries, it looks at trade directories, it looks at the internet and domain names and a whole series of other things where someone may not have taken the step of gone to have registered a particular mark, but maybe using a mark and have rights that could pose a problem for you. And I think it's important to keep in mind beyond that multi-jurisdictional searches are also important. So trademark law goes jurisdiction by jurisdiction. The internet admittedly has made that a little bit daunting and a little bit confusing because footprints are wider and your reach is wider inherently when you're on the internet. But when you run a search in a particular jurisdiction, you're looking at that jurisdiction's register and maybe some common law spillover. Multi-jurisdictional searches, particularly for Canadian companies that may ultimately be looking to make, for example, a US or a UK or a European lead, are important early. And the way you structure your search strategy from, okay, at what phase are we going to do the knockouts? At what phase are we going to start to do a register search? Or when are we only going to do a register search? And when are we going to do common law searching? And when are we at least going to do a high level to see if we have a major problem in one of our key markets of expansion is important. And devising a strategy that's cost effective and practical is very important as well. And admittedly, that can be difficult. So when I work with clients, often I'll facilitate the client's internal team doing a knockout search, hopefully to distill and identify any major problems. And then, we'll work collaboratively in order to find a cost effective approach to further searching in various jurisdictions. And will also depend on the mark. Obviously, for a house mark or a brand, the risk of not searching is far higher than for a slogan that may only live for a short-term campaign. And I think practical approaches to searching from that perspective also matter. And the other thing to keep in mind if you're developing a brand is, how is the brand going to be used, and how easily is it going to be for you to change it if you encounter a problem, and how much marketing or investment dollars are you investing in that brand, and how is the searching and the clearance exercise you're doing commensurate to the risk as well as the investment you're going to make in building a brand and reputation, and doing that in a practical way. So for digital, it may be really easy for you to change things, whereas if you have product that is being manufactured and distributed out into the marketplace, sort of turning that ship to avoid the glacier may be a lot more difficult. And keeping that in mind as informing your search strategy is also quite important. Also, when you're searching, one of the things that's a bit of a catch-22 is that in a crowded marketplace, so on one hand, you want to pick a distinctive mark. On the other hand, often there will be terms that are sort of commonly used as trademarks, or there's a lot of coexistence. And it's important to keep in mind, if there is coexistence, that coexistence is tolerable, that you're comfortable with whatever the parameters are in your zone. So, if Bally Total Fitness versus other Bally's of this world, and they coexist sort of cleanly and safely, but be mindful of how that overlap and how that coexistence is going to work, and whether or not ultimately your marketing team as well as your business teams are comfortable with the boundaries that's going to place on you. And then if you are coexisting, you need to think about brand presentation. It's not just about the word mark, but you need to be mindful that you're not presenting the look and feel of your mark, not using similar designs, similar slogans, that the story that underlies your mark is not going to be confused with your competitors. And this can be it's a thoughtful exercise that you're going through. So if you know that there's somebody else that's using another mark in a totally different or a different sort of channel of trade or with different goods and services, knowing how they present it, what their brand look and feel is, and trying to distinguish yourself on that front is also important. Finally, I'll pause it on a moment for names. At the beginning, we talked about sort of the inherent challenges or the inherent strength of marks based on whether or not they're generic to coined. There's other things you need to keep in mind when you're doing a brand selection process that can create hurdles. One of them is a name. Names are generally more difficult to protect. Generally speaking, you need to demonstrate that they've acquired some level of acquired, or that they've acquired distinctiveness as opposed to being just merely a name, or that they're not primarily merely a name, that they also have some double entendre or some meaning. So be very careful when you select names, even if it's a made up name like Haagen-Dazs. Although if it's truly a made up name, that'll get you away from it. But this is sort of a risky, from a legal perspective, issue. It's more of a lawyer's problem in terms of registration than it is from a clearance perspective, but it is important to keep in mind. The other thing I will flag in terms of inherent problems, in addition to names, there's sort of geographic places, generic words in other languages. So don't think you're being clever by taking whatever the generic word for your product is in another language and using it in Canada, which is English or French speaking. That will be a block to registration as well. And in Canada, we also have what are called prohibited marks, and those are marks either of public authorities or universities or others, and they're basically taken away from the marketplace, and at least vis-a-vis registration, they are a complete block to registration unless you have consent. So being mindful of this, at least from a Canadian perspective, is important. And the other thing and I think that we're seeing more of this now, is there are blocks against scandalous, obscene, and immoral marks. And there are ways to navigate around this, but know that if you're sort of pushing the envelope a bit, you may get some pushback, and you should be mindful about how to manage that piece. Finally, I think it is important to keep in mind translation issues. In Canada, it's a bilingual country. Keep in mind what your mark is in if it's an English mark, in French, and likewise, just think about whether or not you actually want to adopt, particularly for sort of descriptive or suggestive marks, whether or not you want to localize and adopt local language versions of your mark. This is sort of a marketing question that I will be hands off about, but from a clearance perspective, it is important to keep in mind that to clear vis-a-vis whatever the translated version of your mark may be. Oh, it's not letting me switch. Finally, when it comes to protection and global clearance, Canada and many other countries around the world, 124 of them, participate in this international filing system, which offers tremendous savings when it comes to the filing stage. It's called the Madrid system. You can file based on your basic application and cover up to 124 countries. There's still nuances and other costs related to getting to registration, but this does offer material cost savings. There are downsides, so it's important to sort of go in with open eyes and know what you're risking. But it is important to keep in mind that when you're looking for a global expansion, that this mechanism is available and does afford, because I think one of the questions we often get is, how do I do this internationally in a way that's not going to bankrupt us? And this system does sort of facilitate that. Outside of the system, there's a single filing available for all of the European Union. It is important to keep in mind that the UK now, as well as Switzerland and Norway, are not part of the European Union, and those filings should happen separately. Same thing with China. It's important to keep in mind that Hong Kong and Taiwan and Macau are not part of the domestic Chinese filing. And so if you're looking for Asian coverage, you do need to separately file in those jurisdictions. And then a few flags. Obviously, you can see on screen the map that shows where the international filing system is available. The usual sort of carve-outs that can be frustrating for clients include South Africa, New Zealand, Hong Kong, as well as certain parts of Latin America, as well as Africa. And it is important to keep in mind that you may still need some domestic filing depending on your global or national filing, depending on your global strategy, but this is a huge cost-saving mechanism for filing. I think I pass it over to you now, Jeremy, but it won't let me change the slide. Oh, just kidding. Lost in translation. So the other thing to keep in mind when you're doing an international filing program is, what is the meaning of your mark locally? So there are many examples, some of which are quite amusing, of marks that local in one particular jurisdiction and locally to local culture are perfectly normal, and nobody would bat an eyelash. Whereas if you port the mark to a different jurisdiction, the meaning in that jurisdiction may not be the best marketing strategy, or maybe, I don't know, that's not my bag. I'll call out the barf laundry detergent. Barf means snow in Farsi, and obviously here it has a very different meaning. And so just to be mindful of that when you are sort of expanding internationally. What is the meaning of your mark, whether it's a coin term, whether it's a English language or a foreign language term in the other specific markets that you're looking to roll out in. And then finally, as a flag, hello, kitty cat. Finally, as a flag on international branding issues, there are examples where very well-known brands have difficulty entering local markets. In Canada, Holiday Inn, Target, and Smarties are examples. And internationally, other examples include Hungry Jack's in Australia, Best Foods instead of Hellmann's. And here's where I think, in part at least, picking up or rounding out rounding out the look and feel of your branding will make a difference. If you look at the, the Hellmann's product there, you could probably immediately guess without seeing Best Foods that it's a Hellmann's product. And so there is something to be said for trade dress protection as a supplement, but there are very famous examples of sort of things that need to be renamed or branded in foreign jurisdictions. Over to you, Jeremy.
Sorry. Kitten likes to show up in the middle of these presentations. I think this is part of the COVID world that we've met everyone's cats and babies and children, everyone else going in this thing. This is actually our foster fail that she likes to have the center of attention. That's anyways. I think this is all a brilliant conversation, and you're laying down really important conversations, because all of this is very strategic. That what we are doing is protecting and defending our competitive advantage. That these are all business value, and you're raising really remarkable points. Now, with this, all this effort that's going into your marketing, into your brand, into your business, one of the things I can say is, yes, you can change your business name, your brand name. And if you face a problem, you probably will. There has been examples, for example, over the last couple of years where the word ISIS had no meaning and now has meaning. ISIS Pharmaceuticals was named after the Greek goddess Isis, who had clear connotations to their brand, but because of the terrorist organization, they were forced to go through name changes. So, but changing your name is an extreme thing. The best way to think of it is you're taking a vessel and you have to pour your contents from one vessel to another. And so that's messy, that's awkward. So my advice is always this: as best as you can, get it right the first time, because your name is the longest living artifact of any business or brand. A great name will outlive the people, outlive the products, outlive the strategy. Just take some of these examples here. You got DuPont from 1802, Procter & Gamble 1837, Zipper 1917. These brands have been around for a very, very long time. And I'll just highlight a couple here. I think Zipper is a great name. It's an example of a phonetic word where the sound comes together and you get that zip sound. And so a brilliant name. Or cellulite and escalator, which have now become generic terms, were coined phrases or invented words that became iconic. And creating a name that's a verb, I think, is the ideal. Having Google, while that creates a trademarking nightmare, it is truly a powerful, powerful brand position. And I highlight heroin here because it makes me laugh. Turns out it's a trademark. Turns out it was a drug marketed to children for anxiety and toothaches, but now it means something very, very different. But it was a patented trademark. But here's the key message. Take your branding seriously. The process that you use to create a name, the steps you take to defend it, is what's going to create value. You know a brand by its name. The older it gets, the longer you use it, the more it's available, the more value it's contained. When you think of brands like Coca-Cola, it has a century of experiences packed into that phrase. It's so powerful. And even modern growth brands like Amazon, in the span of 20 years, it has created that same type of recognition. It means so much. So the more, if you get it right and you can anchor and hold with it, it's like wine or anything else. This thing gains value. It is an appreciative part of your brand. Kat.
Right. So to pick up, first of all, I will underscore that of all of the IP rights, trademark rights are potentially perpetual, but they're use it or lose it rights. So if you maintain your rights and you use your trademarks properly and they continue to be distinguishing elements, you can continue renewing their perpetual rights, which for intellectual property is pretty extraordinary. So making your mark, and I think that Jeremy, you said it so beautifully that ultimately these are things that will live on. And just to sort of underscore the power of a trademark, You can see a single letter. If a trademark has been used consistently in a particular design format and it's been used extensively, a single letter can identify the associated trademarks. So McDonald's, Amazon, Kellogg's, Pixar, LinkedIn, General Electric, Subway, Target, Unilever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that this goes to show the importance of control, and it goes to show the importance of managing your trademarks. Every little change you make risks not only sort of a little bit of a loss of potentially the reputation or the brand consistency you've maintained, but from a legal perspective, it has the potential to risk your registration. So one of the principles once you have a registration is you have to use it. It's a use it or lose it right. And if you change the look and feel of your mark, and I get change is the only constant, marketers love to refresh and update, but if you change the look and feel of your mark and you don't refile for it, there is a risk that you won't be able to maintain your registration. So on the left side of the screen, you'll see examples of marks that have been maintained, that people have tried to argue that the changes changed the commercial impression or the dominant commercial impression left by the mark. And after some arm wrestling, the registrations were maintained, and these changes were deemed to be not material enough to sort of push the scale or change the impression left, and so the registrations were maintained. On the right side of the screen, you have changes that weren't maintained. So, rejigging, changing the lockup of a word in a design is inherently risky when it comes to a registration. And if you spent 2 years getting to the point of registration and however many dollars, keep that investment in mind when you choose to make the change. There's other examples on screen. And this is a registration risk. It's not necessarily a risk to your rights. Obviously, Meg or Megs and that evolution, you would still maintain certain common law rights, and this is a registration risk. There is, though, if I can change the slide. Oh, it won't let me do this. Thanks, Jeremy. There is, though, a risk of what's called genericide. There is a risk that if the word becomes associated with a product category or a type of product, as opposed to a single source, that it can fall out of the scope of protection for trademarks and become effectively a generic term. Jeremy mentioned escalator and apparently heroin, and there are many other examples. And brand owners have taken very, very significant steps in order to maintain their brands. Ironically, once you've developed a ton of goodwill, there is a risk that you lose it to all, that people start Googling it. And Jeremy, I cringe. I know that we've already had this arm wrestle. I cringe when you say use it as a verb. And I get from a marketing perspective that is what everybody hopes. Everybody wants you to Google it, because how strong of a mark do you have if people are actually using your mark as a verb? From a legal perspective, that is not good trademark use. From a legal perspective, we would like you to say, please conduct a Google search using the Google search engine, which I appreciate is impractical, but the lawyer in me must say that. But here are examples of registered marks that have invested considerably in maintaining their rights. And to give you a sense of that investment, bear with me. Next slide, if you can, Jeremy. Sorry, I don't know why it won't. Thank you. To give you a sense of that investment, there are brand owners that have put out advertising specifically related to their marks being trademarks. So Kleenex, do not erase, Xerox, Clorox are examples. And they've run campaigns in order to make sure that consumers know Clorox is not bleach. Clorox identifies our brand and a particular quality. Xerox is not a generic term for a photocopier. And in fact, they use zipper as an example. And Kleenex is the same. And a fantastic commercial that I'm about to play from Velcro underscores.
We're a company that's so successful that everywhere you go, you see the scratchy, hairy fastener, and you say,
hey, that's Velcro.
But even though we invented this stuff, our patent lapsed 40 years ago. Now no matter who else makes it,
you still wanna call it Velcro.
You think it's awesome for us, we're famous, but we're lawyers and it's causing us grief. Cause there are trademark laws being broken. It's all here in this short legal brief.
And we know that this is confusing because Velcro brand is who we are.
if you call it all Velcro?
We're gonna lose our circled arm.
This is called hook and loop. This part's a hook, this part's a loop. You call it Velcro, but we're begging you. This is f***ing hook and loop.
We know this seems ridiculous. This is a first world situation.
And we made $500 million last year.
I went to Turks on my last vacation. And we're asking you not to say her name. We took 60 plus years to build. But if you keep calling these Velcro shoes, our trademark will get killed. Yeah!
We aren't just doing this for us. We're doing it for all the successful brands that got so popular, people started using the brand names the wrong way. So please, remember.
If you need something to clean up your socks, do it with bleach and not with If you have blood from a boo-boo you made, this is a bandage and not a If you're exercising with someone you're dating, it's in life skating and not I know that bleach stuff is more fun to say, but if you keep doing it, our trademarks go away.
This is called hook and loop. This part's a hook, this part's a loop. You call it Velcro, but we're begging you. This is f***ing hook and loop.
So, and Velcro's not alone. Other companies have had to run campaigns. I think that was executed very well. I know that I'm completely biased because those are the pains that I went. But when I saw that for the first time, it's so funny, very well done. And I think it makes the point that ironically, you invest for 60 years building a brand, and I think in these categories really it's where a particular brand becomes such a preeminent player in the space, or they've created a particular product category that consumers begin to associate the product category itself with the particular mark. And it's important to develop. So if a more recent example is arguably Swiffer, static sheets. It's important if you come up with a new product category and you're naming it to also come up with what you plan to name the generic or what you plan to be the generic descriptor. So other advertising, Rollerblade, Botox, and Frigidaire have all run campaigns in order to help maintain their rights. And I think this all leads us to proper trademark use. And after this talk, we will circulate sort of a short one-pager, and if Jeremy permits us, also the namescape that sort of talks about proper trademark use. But I think it's important that you have internal brand guidelines that maintain consistent use of your brands, that you use the trademark symbol and the R symbol consistently along with trademark notices. You don't have to use it in every space. I know the arm wrestle with marketers that like a clean look and feel, but it is important in certain spaces at least to maintain that when you're licensing your mark, that you have control over the character and quality of what your licensees do, and that you control the way they present the mark and that the way they use it. And ultimately just making sure that when your mark is used, it's used in a way that you've sort of put a fence around and used in a way that's consistent. And that all leads to strong trademark rights, and it will help you maintain those rights. So we will all be so lucky one day to run a Velcro commercial of our own. I'm going to now turn it to. I'll invite Diane to come back, and we'll take a few questions.
Thank you, Kat. And thank you, Kat and Jeremy, for that great presentation. And we'll turn to some questions now. So Jeremy, you did mention that, coming up with the name absolutely sucks. And you did give us an idea of the process that you have to go through to come up with a great name. So at what point during this process would one conduct a knockout search?
So typically after you go through a naming sprint, you're generating hundreds, if not thousands of names, especially if you have a larger team, you can generate a lot. So we typically go through 3 steps. The first one is to eliminate the non-starters. Those are the obvious competitive words, the words that just aren't going to work. So you reduce your list that way. And then we want to, again, do another round of culling. There's an exercise we use called dot voting, where we try to pull that round of options down to 30 to 100 type options that we can now work and evaluate and test. And by the end of the exercises, you want to have, say, a short list of anywhere from 3 to 10 names that you could send to your to knockout. But hopefully you've gone through just the reconnaissance, so you're not just throwing names over the transom and hoping to get lucky. Like, you could at least do a Google search, go to some of the databases and actually check. Like, my favorite one is Urban Dictionary. Make sure it's not an inappropriate phrase. That doesn't need to go to legal. Marketing can do those steps, but it's essentially a process. Do the exercises, do the steps, and you should have a short list of 3 to 10 that you can then send a knockout.
Okay. And Kat, at what point would you invest in conducting further searches?
So I think once your team is sort of committed to, let's say, the top two, usually, well, it depends on the nature of the search, but usually once you've gotten down to the top two, you pick your top one, you would run either an initial register search, or if you know that this is going to be sort of a key brand, running a full common law search. Depending on your budget, you may choose to run full searches for your top three, but that can be depends on size and scale of an organization. That can be cost prohibitive. What I usually also recommend is once you're at the point where you've sort of narrowed your key mark, running at least a knockout, if not sort of a light internal register search of your key expansion market. So if you know that you're rolling out in the US, and then it'll be followed by the UK within the next 3 to 5, then running those at the front end, at least from a high level, to make sure that before you commit for the Canadian or the US market, that you're likely to be able to port internationally. Yeah.
And we do have some questions from the audience, and I do invite the audience, if they have any more questions, they can always submit it. Donna has a question on best practices for tertiary marks, those specific product names that are under the primary brand and also fall under a product category name. Design needs 75 plus for product releases and sends a list of 300 plus to legal for clearance regularly.
They keep you busy. I'd need to know the product category and how crowded it is. So in certain product areas, and also whether or not this is really so for example, in some product categories, there will be brand names as well as common names of products. And if you're looking at clearing both of those, that may give a different answer. But the high level is for that 75, 300 is maybe not an excessive number, but it's the nature of the search that you undertake and how you undertake those searches, and whether or not they're sort of quick knockouts. And then you tier up, or whether or not quick knockouts is sufficient. So to give a simple example in the cosmetic space, for example, nail polish colors, and this is probably not the product category, I'm not sure where this individual is from, but in that space, it's sort of tolerated that there's a lot of coexistence when it comes to sort of nail polish colors or lipstick colors and the like. And the level of searching you do there may be a little bit lighter because you can tolerate greater risk. And then it also depends on whether or not you're planning on filing for the trademark, or whether or not it's really about use without registration. Because if it's about use without registration and it's a tertiary mark and it's associated with 2 other brands that are going to help distinguish, unless you're fully knocked out and you have somebody that has a registration for the exact same mark with, very clearly overlapping services, the risk may be tolerable from a use without registration perspective. I'm happy to pick up, it's hard to answer this question in the abstract because there's so many factors that could weigh into this strategy, but I'm happy to pick up following this call to have a practical discussion about what that internal process looks like and to manage from there. I don't know, Jeremy, I'll pass it on to you from a marketing perspective as to sort of when the 300, maybe vis-a-vis marketing, when the 300 maybe distilled down to a shorter list that gets passed on to legal.
Sounds like you got a budget question on that one.
Yeah.
If marketing's got their hands roped in and budget, they're going to do more legwork or have narrower lists. So you're right. It's a very contextual situation. I can say for most of my clients that they will not regularly be doing large wholesale knockouts unless they're really producing a lot of products. But you take some brands, they can be launching dozens of products a year, so they are wrapped into that.
Okay. And another question that we have. So, Jeremy, if you come upon a roadblock in the naming process, what are some of the strategies you can use to overcome these hurdles?
One of the most common roadblocks is the very first one, is that usually when you're starting a project, there is a name that somebody loves, and they have realized they can't use it, and it's always that headache, whether it's changing a name or launching a name. There's usually that prototype name. Often in Canada, it's as soon as you need to go into another market, especially the United States, you hit that roadblock of, oh, we can't use that. Or you've got a brand product manager, an entrepreneur, someone else who loves it, and the team loves it, and they've used it for a while, but they can't actually launch with it. So one of the simplest activities, and I've done this many times, is you actually have a funeral to put some names to bed so that we can move on and actually create new ones. The other one that ties to this whole side of things, though, is really coming up with the freedom to make good choices. If it's naming by committee, it is always a game of compromise. And the hardest thing and the hardest roadblock I think many people face is you've got an idea, whether it's a word or a concept, but it's abstract. And it's not until you breathe life into it that it has meaning. And so making that leap is really difficult. And so sometimes when you're especially trying to sell the concept, creating prototypes, building mock brand kits, helping to see and realize the applications becomes a very effective way to take an idea and let it live simply beyond, say, a word mark. There's lots of other obstacles. Put people in a room and creativity, and it's a recipe for headaches.
Right. And another question. So everyone nowadays, they're interested in having an online presence. How do you clear domain names?
So clearing domain names, I'll let Kat answer that. I will speak a little bit to the domain name challenge because it is one of the biggest headaches. And this is, to me, a naming strategy topic. Do you need a .com out of the gate? And if you do, budget for it right away, at minimum of probably $50,000, probably more. Because if you want a great name, it's like real estate. You are going to have to buy it. But I also don't think that is a good use of money. The value of a .com has been diminishing over time, in the sense that the only places that you see URLs is on email addresses, business cards, and in print advertising. When you are looking online, you click buttons, so you don't actually see it. So the value of the name is more important than creating that available .com. And you can be very creative. Like you look at Tesla, they operated as Tesla Motors for many years before acquiring the .com. Nissan still operates as Nissan USA. They've never been able to get that, or even like this one drove them nuts. Donald Trump could never get the Twitter handle Donald Trump, so we always operated at real Donald Trump before he got banned. I think the name is more valuable than the domain. I wouldn't have said that 10 years ago, but today I think with social, with other things, focus on what's going to create memorability. Also shareability. A different layer of complexity is, how does your name translate over Siri, Alexa, and those types of products? That's probably more valuable than the domain. Anyways, Kat, what do you think on that?
Yeah, so like I've been involved in some domain name acquisitions, or several domain name acquisitions over the course of time, and it can be quite painful and expensive. I agree on that front. .com, I agree, is no longer king. You know, when search navigation was the way everyone was doing, where everyone was finding a website where you guess what the .com is, then the value of the .com was bigger. But with so many new top-level domains and the role that search engines play, and increasingly the role that sort of apps are playing, although I'm still not sure that they'll replace the traditional website. I agree that they're not as central. The one thing I will flag is that just because you've acquired a domain name, or at least before you make the commitment to invest in a domain name, make sure that you've cleared it for your goods and services. I've had one situation where a client spent a considerable amount acquiring a domain name and then when they approached me and we went to clear, we had major problems clearing it. Practically speaking, obviously, we were sitting on what would be a distinctive piece, but it was very painful, and the client was incredibly frustrated, understandably, because they had spent a considerable amount of money acquiring a domain name that I had to tell them would pose some risk as they, if they chose to enter the market under that. I think and I think that the TLD, the new top level domains, offer many different options. And the one thing I will say from a trademark perspective is, or an enforcement perspective, is once you have landed on your mark, a defensive domain name registration strategy is much cheaper than an enforcement strategy. So it's way cheaper to spend $10 to $50 to register a domain name that's likely to be squatted on than it is to enforce against it. Domain name management can be quite expensive. That's not to say that you need to sort of hoard all the domain names that you can reflecting your brand, because that's also cost prohibitive. But the big ones where there's typo squats likely, or where there is a risk that somebody's going to type in the and direct navigate, picking those up defensively is advisable.
Okay, and Jeremy, you did mention before about Donald Trump's Twitter handle. So can you speak a little bit more to how to obtain social media handles, or the importance of it?
Social media handles are like social is really important in terms of customer service and front facing. So do you have to have it 100% accurate to your name? No. But does it need to be findable, accessible, and clear? Yes. And so as you are naming, it is important not only to look at the URLs and trademarks, but also social media availability. It costs very little if you find domain names or social media handles to cyber squat on them and be capturing them in the creative process. But absolutely, if you are seeing that is part of the competitive landscape. So your customers are going to be there. It's just a guarantee. So you might as well look at that early on.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll flag legally for social media handles, unlike domain names. So domain names, there's a secondary marketplace. Most domain names, as Jeremy said, have been all gobbled up, and you're probably going to buy them through an auction or some broker that helps you. And the strategy you take for an acquisition may depend on whether or not it's already obvious that it'll be you, or if it makes sense to go through sort of a private, anonymous acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. Social media handles don't have that secondary marketplace yet. And actually some of the platforms prohibit trading in social media handles. So if you do look to acquire a social media handle from somebody that already has it, you need to be very mindful about how you structure the deal. And there may be a bit of legal navigation to how to structure a deal in a way that comp doesn't get offside the platform's own approach. But I will flag that sort of buying and selling domain names is different.
Okay. All right. And if there are no more questions from the audience, I'll turn it back to you, Jeremy.
Okay. So I want to just thank you for the questions. It was a great conversation. I want to end today just on a final thought. And I'm just going to share my screen one more time here. One of my favorite quotes comes from Dr. Seuss. He said, "Why fit in when you were born to stand out?" And isn't this what the essence of branding is? Why fit in when you were born to stand out? But as we've talked about today, you see that this is really a journey from strategy and creation all the way through protection and defense. And as you grow your brand, as you breathe life into it, the more time you have with it, the more you invest in it, the better it gets, the more it grows. And so what I always have seen, and what I found writing my first book, Sticky Branding, was that as we profiled hundreds of companies from around the world to understand what makes a great brand, what we found was that is no accident that some companies grow better brands than others. And that's because they make a choice to. And it's that choice to stand out. It's the choice to do something remarkable. So I really appreciate everyone who's participated with us today. Thank you, Kat and Diane, for hosting such an amazing talk. This was a ton of fun. And we will be back in touch with some next steps. But let me hand this back to you, Diane. Any final thoughts before we wrap today?
I just wanted to say a quick thank you to Jeremy as well. Thank you so much for joining. I had a ton of fun preparing this presentation. I hope the audience enjoyed it. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope it was both practical as well as interesting. And you're welcome to reach out to Jeremy or I or Diane with any questions you may have or any follow-up. I think we'll aim to make snippets of this available in various modes. And this is Marks and Clark's 100th anniversary, and this presentation was part of it. So thank you all for being part of us. Diane, part of this. Diane, I'll pass it over to you now to do any final closing remarks.
Sure, of course. And thank you everyone for joining us. And as Kat said, if you do have any questions, you can reach out to us directly and we'll be happy to answer. Have a great day.
Thank you.